Paige Bevill, and I'm doing my project on the Galveston hurricane of 1900. The journey through the storm. Some quick facts about this hurricane. It was on September 8th, 1900. Not many people know about it because it was so long ago. It impacted the citizens of Galveston, Texas, and a few surrounding cities. 8,000 people lost their lives that day, and 3,600 homes were destroyed. All of the city's structures were destroyed or damaged. This is the deadliest natural disaster in the U.S. history to this day. Damage estimates exceeded $30 million. My presentation will cover all aspects of this Galveston hurricane: the history before the hurricane, the effects of the storm, who assisted after the storm, the future of Galveston, Texas, and much more. The history of Galveston. It was a part of the Karankawa Indians territory before Europeans arrived. The first European to see this island was Spanish explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda. In 1528, it was known as the Island of Misfortune by Cabeza de Vaca. Some refer to Galveston as the Island of the Snakes. In 1816, Frenchman Louis Michel Ary became the first European to inhabit this island. He also attempted to establish a government. Major attraction to the island was that the eastern end of Galveston was the best natural port between New Orleans and Veracruz. Galveston's economy developed around shipping. The economic health of their shipping business depended on railroads to transport goods to and from the port. During the storm, it began with thick clouds and small winds. No one knew this hurricane would do so much damage. Smaller areas began flooding first when the rain picked up. The meter averaged wind speeds of 84 miles per hour, with some gusts around 100. The strongest wind that was recorded was 120 miles per hour. Slate, timbers, bricks, and other heavy debris were being thrown through the air horizontally. Frame buildings were shattered to nothing, and even the most storm-proof brick was being collapsed. A lot of buildings collapsed on top of the victims, which then trapped them under the water where they drowned. The entire island was covered by a storm surge of up to 15.7 feet of water. The previous record was 8.2 feet of water in the storm of 1875. After the storm, bodies lay lifeless in the streets. Many bodies were buried beneath rubble but weren't found till later. Structures in 2/3 of the city were totally destroyed. In the remaining 1/3 of the buildings were badly damaged. The Galveston newspaper, published on September 9th, a day after the storm, had a list of the casualties. Many of the survivors found out that day that their loved ones had been taken by this storm. The newspaper, every day when it came out, it had an updated list of the casualties. Police would have to round up men at gunpoint to make them volunteer to clean the streets of the dead bodies because the health reasons. It was getting too bad. People would volunteer and do it themselves, but it wouldn't be enough, and the police would have to take desperate measures. 70 bodies a day were found for the first month, and the last body was found February 10th, 1901, 5 months after the storm had hit. A little over 4,200 bodies were identified, and the rest never were. Here's a picture of one of the houses that had been destroyed by the Galveston hurricane. After the hurricane, a recovery committee was formed. The chairman of the committee was the mayor, Walter C. Jones. The secretary of the committee was the state senator, R.V. Davidson. The chairman of relief services was a ship agent, W.A. McVitie. A banker named John Seeley was in charge of the recovery finances. Ship agent Daniel Ripley was placed in charge of the hospitals. Banker and businessman Morris Lasker was in charge of correspondence. Also on the committee was a financier an alderman, a ship agent, a banker, a rabbi, a congressman, a recorder, an attorney, and an editor. Who helped in the response to clean up the city after this devastating hurricane? The Salvation Army was one. This was the first major disaster that the Salvation Army assisted. Army officers across the whole country responded to help clean, feed, and shelter the survivors of this storm. The relief committee that I just read on the previous slide took care of immediate needs of cleanup, restoration of utilities, feeding, clothing, sheltering the survivors. They also paid for the buildings of 483 new houses. Plus, they furnished partial financial aid for the repair and rebuilding of over 1,000 homes. The American Red Cross Foundation also played a part in the recovery of Galveston. Clara Barton, the founder of the Red Cross, arrived on September 17th with a group of workers. The relief committee delegated to them the distribution of food and clothing until the American Red Cross group left on November 14th. Donations poured in from all various places. Millionaires from New York, black churches in Georgia, religious organizations, labor organizations, fraternal organizations, individuals all across the country raised money to help Galveston. There was a story about an elementary class who all brought their pocket change to donate to the relief fund. Donations also arrived from foreign countries such as Canada, Mexico, France, South Africa, Germany, and England. The total money donated exceeded $1.25 million. The future of Galveston. After the hurricane, the government took extreme measures and hoped that this would never happen again. You can't ever stop a hurricane from hitting your city, but you can do your best to protect it from harm. They developed a new government, one with a strong, centralized control to handle the economy recovery of the city. They also built a massive seawall to turn away the waves if this ever happened again, but the major change is that they lifted the city, the entire city. In some places, the city was lifted more than 16 feet. This was in hopes that the city would never flood like that again. The seawall that I just mentioned on the last slide was built in 50-foot interlocking sections. The side of the seawall that was facing the Gulf was concave, so when the waves would come at it, and the hopes would be that the waves would just round up on it and go back into the sea. It would absorb the shock and turn the waves back onto themselves. Granite riprap, 3 to 4 feet deep and extending 27 feet out from the wall, protected the wall from being eroded by the salt water. Materials were used, such as 52 railroad carloads of crushed granite, 1,800 carloads of sand, 1,000 carloads of cement, 12,000 carloads of round wooden pilings, 4,000 carloads of wooden sheet pilings, 3,700 carloads of stone riprap, and 5 carloads of reinforcing steel. When the wall was finished, it stood 17 feet above mean low tide. It was 15 feet thick at the base, 5 feet thick at the top, 3.5 miles long. Additions happened within the future, and today the wall is 10.4 miles long. At the beginning it was 3 miles long, and now it's 10, so that shows how much they have added to the wall in hopes that no hurricane will ever be that bad again. Purpose was to turn back the waves, like I explained earlier. Here is a picture of the seawall. The city was being lifted. This was more complicated than people realized. In addition to structures, utility lines within the dike had to be lifted. Fences, sidewalks, and outbuildings also had to be repositioned. Some frame structures had been built on stilts because of the city's periodic flooding. Structures that were already there were jacked up as well. While the work was being done, people walked on catwalks above the city as high as 8 to 10 feet in the air. When the job was finished in 1910, 500 city blocks had been raised from a few inches above the ground to 16 feet above the ground. 16.3 million cubic yards of sand were used. Population effects. Before the hurricane, Galveston was a booming town with over 42,000 residents. After the hurricane, 8,000 people lost their lives. The population decreased also because of people moving due to the destroyed city. Other than Galveston, this storm killed about 2,000 more people as it moved on to other cities. Within the 8,000 people that lost their lives in Galveston, 100 of them were from the St. Mary's Orphans Asylum. The whole asylum was flattened out by the storm and there were no survivors. The casualties included 90 children and 10 sisters. Here's a picture from the victims from the St. Mary's Orphanage. Impact from the media. The Galveston News newspaper listed the casualties the day after the hurricane, and each day when the newspaper would come out, they would have an updated list. On September 4th, the National Weather Service out of Galveston received warning from Washington, D.C. that a tropical storm was indeed heading their way from Cuba. On September 7th, they finally issued the tropical storm as a hurricane warning. This was one day before the hurricane hit. The outside media was there after the hurricane, letting the residents know where shelter was and the progress on recovery. However, the media didn't play a huge role in the recovery of this because of power outages, casualties, many effects. There wasn't even a news station, so outside news stations would come in. The controversy with the Galveston hurricane. The people of Galveston were not properly prepared for this hurricane. The National Weather Service out of Galveston chose not to use words like hurricane in order to maintain order within the city. They could see the severity of the storm a week before it even got close to the state. However, the mindset of it will probably weaken or it will not hit us was in place, and they didn't take this hurricane seriously. No one expected the hurricane to be this severe. Isaac Klein and his brother, who was a meteorologist, took it upon themselves to go down the coastline of Galveston and warn people about this hurricane that was coming. This is where the controversy began. Who gave these random men permission to scare the town of Galveston about this hurricane when the news hadn't even been doing it themselves? The question stands today, could more people have survived this deadly hurricane if they would have known ahead of time how severe it could be? Could they have escaped the city and not have put themselves in danger? Of course, nobody knew how much danger would come with this storm, but you could tell by the radars that this storm was serious, but the citizens were not informed. These are my resources that I use for my presentation. Thank you.